big sky, big potential. In association with Mills and Reeve, this is Eastern Promise. Achieving more together. Welcome to the Eastern Promise podcast that brings you the best, brightest and boldest tales of the tantalisingly terrific from across the east of England. I'm your host and troubadour in residence, Mike Rigby. This week, we're dropping into the Forum in Norwich, where Executive Director of the city's Business Improvement District, Stefan Gurney, and BID board member Joe Faulkner, also of KPMG, will be sharing the details of the BID's City Centre Manifesto. What a document it is! Ambitious, bold, determined, setting a direction of travel with an inclusive vision for the city of stories. So, let's begin at the beginning with Joe and Stefan to find out more about the manifesto and the policy proposals therein on this week's Eastern Promise. Norwich is a city that cannot be pigeonholed. It's an enigma, a highly enjoyable conundrum. Its centre can be traversed on foot in a matter of minutes. Produced by the Norwich Business Improvement District, the Norwich City Centre Manifesto doesn't ease into its subject and begins thusly. The UK's city centres are at a crossroads. The challenges of Brexit, COVID-19 and the cost of living crisis has provided a maelstrom for already struggling cities across the East and the UK. As our city centre searches for a new identity, the turbulent landscape provides a pivotal opportunity to align Norwich's biggest ambitions with national policy and investment. And so say all of us. To find out more about the Norwich City Centre Manifesto, I sat down with Executive Director of the Norwich BID, Stefan Gurney, and board member of the Norwich BID, Joe Faulkner, also of KPMG.
We are in the city of stories. We are in Norwich, in the very centre, one of the most fabulous buildings in the centre of Norwich, which is the Forum. And I am here in the office of the Norwich Business Improvement District, the BID, with the one and only. Introduce yourself, please, sir.
Hello, yes, Stefan Gurney. I'm the Executive Director of the Norwich Business Improvement District and Visit Norwich.
And I'm also here with another very special guest.
Morning, yes, Joe Faulkner. Hi, I'm a Director on the BID board and also the Office Senior Partner for KPMG in the region. So KPMG is a global accounting and consulting firm, and we have about 150 people across the patch.
We welcome you both. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Now, I think we can all start from the point that we all agree that Norwich is a fantastic place to live, to work, to have fun, to study. And this has been kind of my sort of nearest city for 25 years now. So coming into it is never anything less than a delight. We have in front of us, you both have the nice printed copies, I have the black and white internet one, of the Norwich City Centre Manifesto. And I am absolutely intrigued by what this has to say, and I'm going to ask you both to take me through it. But Stefan, if I could start with you, could you just, for those who maybe don't know, what is a business improvement district and how deeply are you involved in what goes on in this city?
It's one of those classic questions that whenever you talk about a bid, you make the assumption that no one knows what it is, how it works, or what it really does. So there are about 340 business improvement districts or bids across the UK. And at the present, I'm the chair of the BID Foundation nationally, so we fit into that sort of national model. It was set up in 2004 under central government legislation. To give it the full background, it started in the sort of early 80s in Canada and then went into America in the 90s, and it really tried to deal with the hollowing out of city centres. So when America started building the big malls outside their city centres, they realised that lots of businesses and retail and everything else, leisure, was moving out of the city centres, and they needed to do something collaboratively to make sure that the cities remain vibrant and thriving and were really good places to live and work. And that model took a little bit longer because we didn't have the sort of burning platform as such that the Americans did. They really needed to do something major very quickly. The UK saw that it was coming, saw the model, and ours is slightly different because they work with property owners because their legislation is slightly different to us. We work with the people that basically use the space rather than the property owners. So it's the tenants, it's the people. Some are landlord owners as well, but it's mostly the people that work in the spaces. To explain it, you define a geographical area. So for us, for simplicity, it's the inner ring road of Norwich is the area that we work with. And we talk to the businesses and say, what sort of projects, activities, things would you like to see that would help the working and trading environment make Norwich a really enjoyable place to live and work. And they give a long list, and we start to pull that together into a business plan, funnel it down to things that are deliverable for a budget, and then we get the businesses to vote on it, yes or no, and they have to agree 50% by number and 50% by rateable value, and if that is, it becomes statutory then, and they contribute a percentage of their rateable value, which is agreed as part of the business plan. Here is 1.1%, so it gives us roughly about 900,000 a year to do all the things on the list that they want to do in the business plan, and that's from marketing, PR, pushing the city for tourism and growth, that sort of visit Norwich side of it. Then it's about the experience. So when you get here, is it safe, secure? Is it enjoyable? Is there lots going on? Is there musical events? Is there food events? Is it a really place that has lots of activity in it, so it's enjoyable to live in? And the last one is sort of around inward investment and around working in Norwich. So other things like infrastructure, accessibility, all those things that make it possible to trade in a city, but are the less unseen things. So it's around research and lobbying and pushing for the best in Norwich. And this is where the manifesto came out of. So the Business Improvement District works every 5 years. So every 5 years we have to justify our existence and say, okay, last 5 years we did this. What do you want for the next 5 years? And that sets the business plan. But we were aware that realistically there were goals that were much longer than 5 years. So you want to think about a city in both short term but in longer term as well. So what should be the 15, 20 year goals for the city? What should be the bigger aspirational pieces which will never be delivered in 5 years, like altering the trains, the social mobility, all those things that are long term impacts. And that's where the manifesto was born from.
Fascinating. You tempted me to ask, and I'll frame this in a kind of bid, national bid thing. But to what extent, and I love chasing down things that just intrigue me, but to what extent do things sort of, you ask for those opinions of what can be done, things that you sort of come before you think, well, that sounds really, really nice, and that would make a huge difference. But there's no way, realistically, we'd ever make it happen. I'm thinking if there was something like a tram line around the city, for instance.
Yeah, I was going to say there are things that are within scope. Nationally, you have big bids like Manchester and Liverpool who have much more scope, much more funding, and then they have the mayor infrastructures that they can work with to make a difference. Leeds has one bid for the whole of Leeds, and its budget is I think about 4 million a year. So it's 4 times the scale of Norwich's is, and we are big. We're a top sort of 20 bid with our revenue compared to the other sort of 300. Most bids are smaller cities. So you think Kings Lynn, Great Yarmouth has them, Bury St Edmunds have them, Newmarket has it. So you have smaller cities with smaller scales, and they're sort of 100, 200, 300,000 revenue compared to Norwich is close to 1 million. So you have that sort of scale of what you can do with those business improvement districts. Trams is always one of those ones, for an example, that everyone thinks it would be such an amazing idea, but forgets that we live in the middle of a medieval city,
Yes, exactly.
which you would have to ban every other form of transport into the city to be able to put trams back in. So it's sort of one of those, well, wouldn't it be lovely if... No, because it would be absolute carnage.
Yes.
So I don't do... But there are things when we were talking about it, other people sort of were really passionate about and go, oh, I think one of the most ridiculous ones we had when we did the very first one in 2012, there was talk about someone suggested we put the first Norwich person on the moon as one of the things that were...
Big.
Yeah,
Think big. That's good.
Think really big and ridiculous. That was one of the ones that quickly went off the table as never achievable. Nice to have those sort of ideas, but just unachievable. I think there are other ones that we've put in here that are big infrastructure pieces that are probably well beyond the scope of even the region. So pushing the network to be dual to London would be absolutely amazing for Norwich. That would be something that would be a game changer. So when they shut the tracks we're not on bus replacements, which is the bane of most sort of people who live or work in the city, that would be amazing. So if you could dual it so that even when they did the works, you could still have a functional train service. You could have fast tracks because you could have overtaking trains. At the moment, it's single track, so no train can overtake each other. If one breaks down, that's it, you're gone. If they do a bit of work, that takes that whole section out, so of the ones that I like, which I know, having chatted with colleagues at Greater Anglia and Network Rail, it is so far down the list. But if you don't aspire to do something, if you don't push it, if no one says it, it's never going to happen.
And things can rise up the list if you. I'm showing my sort of slightly previous life colours here. If you can make enough of a fuss, make a really well-run campaign, you can get those things up the list if you use that verve and imagination, for which this city is very well known.
And I think you and I were at the Eastern Networking Conference that was in Newmarket, where we talked about the likelihood of the infrastructure changes in the Eastern region, and everyone's like vying for different pieces, and how challenging it is when they gave the visualisation of the number of tracks that head out from Cambridge to the west. There were about 8 tracks per hour, and then you looked at the number of services that went east from Cambridge, and it was 1.
Yeah.
And that was really strong visualisation of how all the investment and all the infrastructure basically never goes east. And so it's really difficult to push for growth and for investment, even though we're one of the few net GDP contributors to UK PLC. The East is one of the few net contributors in the whole of the UK, and yet we get no investment.
And it's a real shame, isn't it? Because strategically, the region's so important with the coastline and the green energy off there, nuclear power, the country's largest port. So the importance of getting this region moving properly and maintaining it and driving careers and jobs and all the rest is really key for the country overall.
We are here to talk about, and I've digressed completely from it now, the City Centre Manifesto, which is a fabulous document. Joe, you were at the launch at Carrow Road, the mighty Carrow Road. Tell us what you made of that event and the feeling in the room.
It was a great launch. So the manifesto itself, I think, is a sort of recognition that for all cities, they are facing some fairly critical decisions about their evolution in the future. So, we've had COVID, obviously, Brexit's been challenging. The general decline of physical retail and move towards online has caused challenges. So I think a lot of cities now are thinking, well, what do we need to be for residents and for businesses in 10, 15, 20, 30 years' time? And so the manifesto kind of captures some aspirations around that. And the launch itself was a great event, a packed room, and the focus of it was really on having conversations. So hearing some of the thinking behind the manifesto, which landed very well, and then getting people together to share their own thoughts amongst themselves and with the wider room. It was great. It was like most of the events that I go to in Norwich, it was a really vibrant crowd, energised. There were some great bacon rolls, which helps, but always really good engagement. And I think that probably reflects the fact that people that know Norwich, live or work in Norwich, are deeply committed to it generally.
I think it does that to you, doesn't it, Stefan? It's a city that really really kind of, I don't want to say gets under your skin, but it really kind of, there's a magic to it. And I'm getting slightly poetic, overly poetic now, but there is a magic to it. And I think that's, even though in terms of population, it's one of the largest cities in the region, it feels very, very intimate, very snug, very cosy. Everything's near at hand. And that must be a really great hand of cards to be sort of playing this great game with.
Yeah, it is one of those. We always sort of describe it as a sort of maverick spirit, and that's sort of come all the way through from when we were an open city in the sort of medieval times and the Norman sort of times. That is the bit for us that you see when you come to Norwich. It is different, and we did some perception surveys with Ipsos Mori when we were starting out on the City of Stories work to understand how people associated with Norwich or understood Norwich, and it was sort of three different sections of response. There was the challenge, which is 40% of people didn't know anything about Norwich, couldn't even place it on the map, a lot of them. One person thought it was in Europe. So it was it's that challenge that you've got 40% of the population know nothing about it. And then you had the sort of bit where, when the middle sort of section was, if you'd heard of Norwich, you had a few universal sort of ideas of what it was like. Mostly it was sort of like a sleepy rural sort of city in perceptions, and they had some brand awareness which was pretty much like Coleman's Mustard, the football club and the UEA were the sort of standard ones, with an occasional throw in of Alan Partridge depending on your age and demographic. But that was the sort of perceptions of Norwich. And then you had the third piece, which was, if you had ever been to Norwich, you knew someone from Norwich, you had family there, you had studied in there, you'd gone on holiday there, you were a huge advocate of it. There was no sort of middle ground of people who were apathetic about it. Once they'd come here, they were like, I love Norwich. I would quite happily live there. I'd go on holiday there. I'd love the place. So actually, if you've ever been or had any contact with Norwich, it's really easy to be an advocate for it, which really helps me, and I do look at other colleagues who have cities and towns across the UK and go, I'm very glad that I live where I am, and I have, as you say, the deck of cards that I've been dealt with Norwich. It's much easier to be able to push something that's a really strong proposition, and I deal and talk with colleagues from Kings Lynn and Great Yarmouth and Bury St Edmunds and Ipswich and other cities that and towns that are much more difficult to work with because the proposition is very difficult, and talk with colleagues in some of the more rural towns and cities in the north of England, the west of England. When you have a really good proposition, it's easy to be able to advocate for it strongly.
And you've certainly come out with a really strong list of priorities in the manifesto, but why a manifesto?
Well, what we wanted was something with a longer term sort of impact, something that represented, we wanted to be able to articulate to people what the business community wanted for longer term for the city. We were aware that, as we'd said, our sort of BID business plan is a business plan. It's sort of like an annualised thing. It works over a 5-year period. So you're very much in that moment. You're not thinking about the longer term needs or wants for a city. And that's where we sat down and talked to the business community and said, what is it that actually will help us grow and thrive as a city? What is the next step for Norwich, and how do we get to that place? And that's where we started doing some of the mapping of it. We started doing that classic sort of almost doing a SWOT analysis for a city, going, what is it that are the strengths of it? What are the weaknesses? What things do we need to be able to provide for that opportunity? If we do these things, what will be able to achieve as a city? And that's where we then again came with lots of lists and lots of things that people aspire to, but there was universality in there. You looked at certain things and people went, actually, it's amazing how many things come up time and time again that are some of the hurdles or challenges, and some of the things that universally we all identify as the real strengths of a city.
This document, I think, will become a bit of a guiding star, so something to refer back to over time and think, how are we performing against the ambition that we've got here and the priority areas, and making sure that everyone's on the same page, or 8 pages, or however long it is, and kind of pulling in the same direction, I think. It's a really useful thing.
Could you just talk to those priorities and what sort of the key ones are?
So there are 10 areas, I think, overall that we've outlined as priorities. So they cover good employment, the strength of the economy, leisure and hospitality, then we've got the cultural activation side of things, public services and so on. So it basically straddles what's important for the city going forwards, both for businesses, for residents, for families, for everyone that's visiting, to become a really strong proposition overall.
So what in your toolbox as a BID, and obviously as individual people using and working in the city, what are the key areas do you think you can address? I don't want to say most easily or most urgently, but what are the ones that I suppose you're both best equipped, a combination of that best equipped and most pressing that the BID wants to get into?
Well, I think we've got loads of strengths to leverage already, right? Which we've talked about a bit, but also things like the fact that it's a relatively affordable city, so house prices to earnings, it's a good ratio. We've obviously got beautiful spaces around us. I think on some of those strengths already, the opportunity is to just shout more about them and make sure that they're recognised further afield than Norwich itself or Norfolk, and that is becoming a very strong pull factor for people. I think then some of the things to address, we know that there are challenges around social mobility, and there's great opportunity for public sector, private sector, and the third sector to work together to combat some of those challenges. So I think there are levers there that the BID and the businesses and the community can pull quite easily, but it's where that point about alignment comes in. So making sure that everyone perceives the same opportunity areas, the same challenges, and is pulling together.
It's talking the same language at national level, because you only have so much capacity and bandwidth to talk to central government and the funding. So if you have those universal things that are, or mantras that you tell again and again to government, it will start to sink in. Yes. And you have to have everyone saying the same thing, or central government just turn off and it's white noise. If there are too many voices and things nationally, then you're struggling to cut through. So I think that's one of the key bits, to be able to have a unified ask from the central government. And obviously devolution may change that, and we're obviously through that in the third iteration of whatever devolution/unitary we're in, but that's a process where we can start to engage strongly with government, and this will hopefully allow us to talk to that devolution deal and saying these are the things that are the priorities for the city and the business community in it. I think, going back to your original question, there are probably a couple of things that are within our own gift. There are others that we can work with others towards, and there are some that are just aspirational that we think would have the value, but it's a longer journey than it is. The things that are I think we've identified in some of the things that we can work on, one of them being around the recruitment and retention of staff. So we have, alongside Visit Norwich, which is the tourism branding for the city, which is around driving holiday makers and stays and pushing the sort of long weekends and breaks and those sorts of things through the Visit Norwich. We've also built the Work in Norwich as part of the Towns Deal funding, which pushes Norwich as a business destination, and it's got a lot of really strong assets that we can all utilise. They're open source, any business can use them, anyone who wants to use them to advocate for Norwich. We've built those, they are there, the videos, the brand piece, and it pushes Norwich. When we first started the BID, it was one of the key things that businesses wanted. They were challenged on the recruitment and retention of staff. A lot of the time they found it really difficult for even getting people on the trains to come to Norwich to do interviews, because people had no perception. They didn't know whether there was enough depth in the city for what they wanted. They liked the idea of the culture and the heritage of the city and the city itself, but was there enough jobs that were in the job family that they did? Was there enough opportunity? Because they often thought they would just come for one job and then that would be one job and out, and then you've put yourself into a narrow space, and that's not true. There is huge numbers of various sectors which multi-lay over. So that work in Norwich is ours, and we've pushed and done campaign activity, and the businesses really wanted that to help them to change that mindset of people. And we saw when we did the first campaign of work in Norwich, we pushed it into the corridor down towards London on the trains and into London as well. And I think the metrics that we saw, so we were measuring some of the impressions, and we got a huge number of impressions, individual click-throughs, and that sort of recognition. But we also saw in organic searches for both properties and jobs in Norwich go up. And I think the organic searches for properties in the 2 weeks that we ran the thing went up by 80%. And the organic searches for jobs in Norwich went up by about 125% in the 2 weeks that we ran it, and then dropped back down again. So you can see that you can do and engage with those people. There is, once you talk to them about it, real interest in Norwich. People just aren't aware of that it's not the leafy sort of rural space that it is, actually, that it's a thriving, really enjoyable city with lots of culture, lots of heritage, lots of opportunities for work and development and jobs. The other one that we have within our own remit is one of the things that we put about is that sustainable challenge for a city, to be a sort of green city. And we've challenged ourselves to be the UK's first self-sufficient solar energy city. And we are developing at the moment, and it's in transit, and the first one should go through, to build the UK's first urban solar farm. So we are placing solar on the top of all the businesses in the city centre that have the right roofs and space. And obviously if you've got a thatch, it's very difficult to put solar on a thatch, but there are loads of flat or azimuth facing, south facing things that actually, if we used all the roofs in Norwich, we could generate 140% of the requirements for energy of the city. So we could actually power our own city for the needs of the city centre through solar. So we've now worked with a national company, and anyone can get involved. Go and have a look at the Norwich solar system. If you've got a business in the city and want to be involved, have a look at it. There's a free process to go through, and there's then a model that we've built that will allow businesses to be part of basically a local energy network. So our energy doesn't go out to other places, it's kept locally, and it basically allows local businesses next to each other to help the city, and that is within our own gift. That is something we've developed. I think the first 59 sites are in transit. We're hoping that the first ones land this month to go installing on, and there are a couple of ones that are really close to installation. So these are things that are aspirational, but are things that are in our own gift, and we are doing and delivering. So we're not just talking about some of them we can do, and I think as we've said, we've set 4 different sort of ambitions, aspirations or priorities, and within those there are 3 targets for each of those, so there are 12, and at least 2 of them are in our own gift to deliver. Some of them are longer term, but you have to be able to deliver some yourself to be able to set the precedent.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, things like the solar system. I mean, that's just a continuation of that maverick thinking that we discussed earlier. You know, that's not an easy thing to put in place, and there's no blueprint for it. So the fact that the BID has taken that and driven it is really impressive. And when I speak to national colleagues within my firm and talk about this sort of thing, they are really blown away by it. It's great. And there's part of that is just continuing that, raising our voice nationally and getting a wider audience and appealing to the national market.
I love that. Why wouldn't you want to do something like that? Because anyone who says, yes, but our city's really old and, blah, blah, blah. Well, hello, Norwich is a medieval city. This city is about as, one of the oldest in the country. And, that's a bit of a sweeping statement. I better check my facts on that one, but I'm sure I'm probably right. And we can do it. And I would imagine for those who may not be persuaded, and you should be, frankly, but may not be persuaded by the environmental aspect, then certainly you should be persuaded by the financial aspect. Because I know with someone who's I've got a south-facing roof on my house, and it's now festooned with solar panels, which, yes, was a bit disruptive for the time it was going in, but now it's made a huge difference financially. During the day, if I'm working in my office, I'm doing it, the power is free, effectively. That's just wonderful that you've sort of seen that opportunity and you've led with it and you've gone, this is what we're doing, and people are rightly, I think, amazed by that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that what we're looking for now is the proof of concept, because those things will actually, once you've got some metrics that sit with it, it becomes more sort of real to people, because you can go, does it really do what you're saying? And you can go, well, actually, here's how much power it's generating, here's how much money you're saving as a business. And as we sort of understood it, the metric really comes down to the fact that most of the cost of energy, that is the discretionary part in a sense, 30 to 40% of cost of energy is the movement of the energy. So if you remove that movement of energy, you reduce 30% of the cost, which then allows it to be reduced, and everyone will be able to see the savings. So the model allows the people who install it to make a little bit, the landowners to make a little bit, the tenants to make a little bit, and therefore everyone gets the value out of it. And the model, which we were amazed at, sort of standardly has payback within sort of 3 to 4 years, which is much quicker than the sort of standard solar. And aware fully that people come with different types. So some people already have solar but still want to be part of the grid. Some people want the solar installed and to have that the whole infrastructure built for them. And so you've got it doesn't have to be it must be this. We can work with people in any shape or form, and that's the real value of it. And I think that helps to be able to say, look, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're doing some of the things that we think will make a difference. And we know that some of the nationals who are based here, both some of the big sort of national chains, are interested in piling it in our stores to then roll it out across their whole portfolio, which will therefore make a difference to the whole of the UK. And again, Norwich leading on that, and we know there's an aspiration from some of the housing associations and the local council to be able to use it for their own housing stock as well, using the same model, because obviously the capital investment is what makes it really difficult, and that is mitigated in this process, because it will cover the cost as part of that local energy network. So really good things to do, but there are areas, as we've identified, that sort of growth area, the connection area, sustainability, and that sort of inclusion and collaboration, the sort of 4 key areas that we really think will make a difference to the city.
Joe, there are 4 words in this manifesto that really leapt out to me, and I want to invite you to sort of explain the thinking, because I'm not going to take a position on either way. I think we definitely in this region need a lot more swagger about how we go about stuff, because I think we've got such a strong story to tell. We've been telling it this morning. Capital of the East. Now, before our listeners in Ipswich detonate, talk me through that.
Yeah, I need to be careful what I say, because I live in Suffolk and I also run our office in Cambridge, so I'm going to be a bit cautious.
To be fair, I think Cambridge would probably be quite relaxed about it, to be honest.
So I think that there is a sense that when you look at Norfolk in particular, Norwich is the centre of gravity for the county. And I think if you actually look at Norfolk and Suffolk, it still has that sort of gravitational pull that doesn't really exist in many of our other urban centres across the region. So there's also then the universities, fantastic research parks and everything else. So having it as a base that attracts people in, is recognised as the core regional hub is a really sensible direction of travel, and I think Norwich has a lot of the assets that are needed from a regional capital centre like that. So again, it's aspirational, it needn't be that political, but I think recognising that improving the city, making sure it's got a really compelling offering for everyone, it all lines up to point in that direction.
But I think what it does as well, very sensibly and very excitingly, is it forces the conversation we're having right now in that let's talk about why Norwich should be regarded as such, and perhaps it will encourage other cities in the region to say, well, hang on a minute, we've got this, and to share what's great about our places can never be a bad thing, surely.
Well, I think that so there is the sort of, there's an element of competition when you say the capital for the region, right? But I think also the other thing that is really powerful is collaboration between our towns, cities, counties, all the rest of it, to make sure that we're sharing best practice. And as far as I'm concerned, when I think about how businesses collaborate across the whole region, it's making sure that's as frictionless and seamless as possible. So I'm 100% supportive of collaboration and a collective voice, personally.
Absolutely.
And for me, obviously, the capital of the East comes back to some of the not just the modern times. You can start in the historic context of it. You said that we were the second city in the UK in the medieval times. Even in the Norman times, we were a major city, and therefore we have maintained that position as a regional centre. And the logic sort of sits there. I think if you're looking just on boundaries, you could sort of go, the only one that's bigger, I think, is Peterborough, which is about 215,000, and Norwich is about 145,000. But then if you talk Norwich as Greater Norwich, which is what you normally do, and probably with the devolution deal is what would be like talked about as a concept, then you go to 420,000 in Greater Norwich, which is a much bigger footprint when you take in all the urban conurbations with it as well. And that sort of gives us a bit more credence. And you start then talking about our retail catchment as well, and our retail catchment is about 1.3 million. So you're sort of going, from that context, we have a much larger footprint than probably any of the other towns or cities across the East, which really therefore probably from that analogy gives us a real rationale as to why we're saying in the East. And the classic one that we always sort of have a challenge of is when anyone describes what the East is, everyone varies. I've yet to find someone who takes a uniform view of where the East is, and especially if you talk to central government.
One of the dangerous phrases we have, particularly in Norfolk and Suffolk as well, is I didn't know this was here. And you do a lot of work in changing that as the BID. So could you give a shout out, we'll start with Joe, to one of the sort of the undiscovered gems that you want more people to know about in this city, if you can?
So when I first took on the role of leading the office here, I made a video of my sort of commute and things for colleagues in my team across the country to share, and I got exactly the same response. People dropping me a line and saying, I had no idea that was in Norwich. So I think the thing that is the sort of secret power for the city, I think, is the diversity of what we've got. The whole breadth of culture, entrepreneurship, public spaces, large corporates here as well. It's just trying to convey that strength to a wider community. I think that's what we need to do.
We've talked about the NRP and the fact that has more scientists, researchers and clinicians than any other city in Europe, and we have more here than Cambridge. Cambridge just shouts louder, but actually Norwich has more, which is a sort of untold sort of story that needs shouting louder. I talk a lot, we work a lot with the sort of retail offer and the mix between high street Street, the centres, and the unique independence like the Norwich lanes, which is really vital to Norwich to create that. And I think we sort of underplay tourism for the city and the county, because you forget that basically we're the driest region, we're the driest city and county, and therefore our tourism offer is all year round, where you have, and I was in a meeting yesterday with the Hoteliers Association and Pete Waters from the LEP, and we were talking about the value of tourism. I think here is about 4.6 billion a year, compared to Devon and Cornwall, which is 3.5. So we generate more money for the county and the region for tourism than Devon and Cornwall do. So those are the sort of things where you're unaware of actually how important we are and the sort of key assets we have. I do, in the last couple of bits, I always enjoy a couple of sort of those crazy sort of things. There are two things that I always like. The fact that we were a free city, the only one in the UK in the sort of medieval times, everyone was tied into guilds, and no one could trade unless you were a member of the guild, with the exception of Norwich. Norwich was an open city and anyone could trade and build a business here. We were also the home for what was the Gurney's Bank, but Barclays Bank. They were the first people to allow individual personalised banking. So everyone has a bank account thanks to Norwich. Because before, you're welcome, world. And the other one I like is the fact that Norwich rioted and wiped out in the cathedral some of the Roman Catholics, and we were excommunicated by the Pope as an entire city, and that's never been rescinded. So we are technically the only city in the world that has been excommunicated and remains excommunicated from the Pope and the Catholic faith. Even though we have a Roman Catholic cathedral here, that's never been rescinded. So there you go.
My huge thanks to Stefan and to Joe and all the team at the Norwich BID, which should be congratulated for grappling with these issues in a solutions-oriented way, not simply trying to leverage grievances, whether justified or not. You can read the Norwich City Centre Manifesto by following the link in the show notes. And that's all there is for episode 131 of the Eastern Promise podcast. You know these words, sing along. I have been Mike Rigby, and will be so again next week, when we will be peeking behind the curtain at the University of Cambridge's preferred investor, promoting people, ideas and science, Cambridge Innovation Capital. I'll be joined by Managing Partner Andrew Williamson and fellow partner and Innovate Cambridge board member Michael Anstey. We'll be discussing whether the ecosystem makes the investor or if the investor determines the ecosystem, and looking at the way CIC puts strong ESG values at the centre of its work. That's one to look out for in 7 days' time. So until then, bye for now. To hear other episodes of the Eastern Promise podcast and to find out more about what we do, go to our website at easternpromise.org.uk. Eastern Promise is a Pudding Shed production in proud association with Mills & Reeve. Achieving more together.